The rain battered against the windowpane of Theo Blackwood's study in downtown Boston. I sat across from him, the aroma of his cherry tobacco pipe filling the room. Theo was not just an old friend. He was a man who had walked the thin line between the known and the unknown for decades. A parapsychologist who had seen things science couldn't explain. "You asked about the strangest case of my career, Arthur," Theo said, his voice gravelly. "It wasn't a ghost. It was something heavier. It was the case of Lily Harper." "Who was she?" I asked, leaning in. "A 7-year-old girl from a quiet suburb in Ohio. This was back in '88. Her parents brought her to me because she kept screaming in her sleep. But it wasn't just nightmares. She would wake up crying for her real mother and talking about a house with a red door in a town she had never visited, a place called Willow Creek." Theo took a long drag from his pipe. "The doctors called it schizophrenia. I called it a leak in the soul's memory." The story Theo unfolded was chilling. Lily claimed her name wasn't Lily, but Rose. She insisted she had been pushed into the icy waters of a lake by a man she called Uncle Vic. Intrigued, Theo decided to drive the Harpers to Willow Creek, a small, decaying town 3 hours away. As they entered the town, the little girl's demeanor changed. She stopped crying and started pointing. "Turn left here," she commanded from the back seat. "The big white house is past the bridge." Her parents were terrified, but Theo drove on. Sure enough, past an old wooden bridge, stood a large, Victorian-style white house. It had a bright red door, just as Lily had described. "That's where I lived," Lily whispered, her eyes wide. "And that's where he lives." An elderly man was sitting on the porch, rocking in a chair. He looked respectable, a pillar of the community. His name, as it turned out, was Victor Calloway. Theo approached him, feigning the role of a historian interested in the property. But Lily didn't wait. She marched right up to the porch, staring at the old man with eyes that looked far too old for her face. "You never found the locket, did you, Vic?" she said, her voice steady and cold. Victor froze. His face went pale. Who are you?" "You pushed me," the 7-year-old girl said. "By the boathouse. Because I saw you taking Daddy's money from the safe. You pushed me, and my locket fell into the mud." Victor stood up, trembling. "Rose? That's impossible. Rose drowned 40 years ago. It was an accident." "It wasn't," Theo interjected, stepping forward. "And I think if we dig by the old boathouse, we might still find a silver locket, won't we?" The psychological weight of the moment crushed Victor. The secret he had kept for 4 decades, buried under the guise of an accidental drowning, had come back to haunt him in the form of a child. He collapsed into his chair, weeping, essentially confessing to a crime that the law had long forgotten. Theo looked out the window of his Boston apartment, the memory fading. "We found the locket," Theo said softly. "Buried deep in the mud, just where she said it would be." Victor was too old for prison, but he died a week later, some say from guilt, others say from fright. "And the girl, Lily?" I asked. "That was the strangest part." Theo smiled faintly. Once the truth was out, the memories faded. She forgot about Rose. She grew up to be a normal woman, completely unaware that she had once solved her own murder. Theo tapped his pipe into the ashtray. "You see, Arthur, death is not always the end. Sometimes, it's just a pause before the truth demands to be heard." I never thought I'd end up in a place like Hollow Creek, West Virginia. I was a poet from Brooklyn, desperate for a paycheck, and the Teach for Appalachia program was the only door open. Back then, the modern school board system wasn't really a thing in these parts. So, when I got the letter, I packed my bags and left my fiancée, Sarah, behind in the city. The job was in a town that barely existed on the map, a cluster of 40 dilapidated cabins surrounded by the dense, suffocating woods of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was the only teacher. The school was nothing more than a refurbished barn. Mr. Vance, the head of the local school council, greeted me on my first day. He was a burly man with chewing tobacco, stained teeth, and a skepticism for city slickers written all over his face. "Don't expect much, son," Vance grunted, spitting onto the dusty ground. "Folks here work the mines or the timber yards. Books don't put food on the table." I played along, acting humble. "I'm just here to help however I can, Mr. Vance." It worked. He seemed to think he had the upper hand, and I let him believe it. But the isolation was brutal. The silence of the mountains was heavy, broken only by the wind howling through the pines. That's when I met her. Her name was Cassidy. She wasn't like the others. In a town covered in coal dust and despair, she was ethereal. I first saw her walking near the edge of the woods behind my cabin, a lonely, spectral figure in a faded floral dress. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was something darker. I forgot about Sarah. I forgot about my morals. I invited her in. Cassidy didn't speak much. She had sad, deep eyes that seemed to hold a century of grief. She felt cold to the touch, yet she ignited a fire in me I couldn't control. We spent nights together while the mountain storms raged outside. I felt like I was under a spell, drawn into her world, ignoring the whispering shadows in the corners of the room. One morning, after a particularly intense storm, I woke up alone. The air felt different, stale, empty. I went to town to find her, but when I described her to an old woman at the general store, she turned pale. "Cassidy?" the woman whispered, making the sign of the cross. "Child. Cassidy Miller died 10 years ago. Died in childbirth, buried down by the creek. She always wanted a baby more than anything." A cold shiver ran down my spine, freezing my blood. The cold skin, the silence, the sadness. Panic took over. I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things in a frenzy, leaving a resignation letter on Mr. Vance's desk. I drove back to New York without looking back, praying the distance would wash away the memory of Hollow Creek. I tried to fix things with Sarah. I told her the stress was too much, that the mountains were too lonely. She forgave me, and we promised to start over. But the story didn't end in the mountains. Months later, on a rainy Tuesday in Manhattan, I was walking down Fifth Avenue. The city noise was deafening, a comfort after the silence of the woods. Suddenly, I stopped dead in my tracks. Across the street, standing motionless, in the bustling crowd, was a woman. She was wearing a heavy coat, but I recognized the faded floral dress underneath. Her face was hidden by a hood, but I knew those hands pale, translucent, hanging by her sides. She turned to face me. My breath hitched. Her coat was unbuttoned enough to reveal her silhouette. She was heavily pregnant. People walked right through her, unaware of the specter in their midst. But she saw me. For a second, a faint, chilling smile touched her lips, a look of twisted gratitude. Then, the traffic light changed. A bus roared past, and she was gone. I stood there, drenched in rain and sweat, my heart pounding against my ribs. Was it a hallucination? Or had I given a restless spirit the one thing she couldn't find in life? The echo of Hollow Creek had followed me home, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that a part of me would belong to the darkness forever. The ceiling fan in Dr. Eric Thorne's office in New Orleans spun lazily, barely stirring the humid afternoon air. He had been a psychiatrist for 20 years, but he had never met a man quite like Arthur Blackwood. Arthur was the last scion of the Blackwood dynasty. At 70, he carried himself with the fading elegance of the Old South, wearing a linen suit that had seen better days, his silver hair swept back from a forehead etched with anxiety. "Do you know what a strangler fig is, Doctor?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling slightly. Dr. Thorne leaned back. "A type of parasitic tree, I believe, common in the swamps." "Parasitic, yes, but patient," Arthur whispered, leaning forward. "It starts as a seed dropped by a bird in the crevice of a building or another tree. It grows roots downward, wrapping around its host, slowly tightening its grip until the host dies and rots away, leaving only the hollow shape of the fig. That is what is happening to my home, Doctor. To my life." Arthur lived in Blackwood Manor, a crumbling plantation house deep in the bayous, miles from the nearest town. The estate, once grand, was now being reclaimed by the swamp. "It started 3 months ago," Arthur continued. "I saw them saplings, tiny green shoots growing out of the brickwork on the third-floor cornice. I cut them down. I dug out the roots. But a week later, they were back. More of them. Stronger." "Roots are persistent, Arthur," Dr. Thorne said gently. "Old houses have cracks. It's natural." "This isn't natural," Arthur snapped. "They move, Doctor. I swear they move. My groundskeeper, Miller, he's been with us for 40 years. He vanished 2 weeks ago. Police say he likely fell into the swamp, drunk. But I know. The roots got him. Dr. Thorne prescribed sedatives, diagnosing Arthur with severe paranoia fueled by isolation and the stress of a decaying legacy. But Arthur kept returning, looking more haggard each time. They killed Buster, Arthur said a week later, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Buster was his old golden retriever. I found him in the attic, crushed, wrapped in vines that weren't there the day before. Arthur, did you? I didn't hurt him. Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. It's the house. It wants us gone. Last night, I woke up and I felt them. Thick, green tendrils tightening around my throat. I grabbed my machete. I hacked at them until they retreated. Dr. Thorne grew worried. He planned to have Arthur committed for his own safety. But the following week, Arthur missed his appointment. Instead, Detective Malone from the Louisiana State Police sat in Dr. Thorne's office. You treated Arthur Blackwood? The detective asked, placing a grim photo on the desk. Yes. What happened? Homicide. Double homicide, Malone said, wiping sweat from his brow. He killed his wife Eleanor, hacked her to pieces with a machete in their bedroom. Then we found the body of his missing groundskeeper, Miller, locked in a basement storage room. Same weapon. Dr. Thorne felt a chill run down his spine. He thought they were the trees. He told me he was fighting off the vines. That's the thing, Doc, the detective said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a hush. When we found Arthur, he was sitting in the corner, babbling about cutting out the rot. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. What is it? Around the wife's neck, and around the old groundskeeper's body, we found them. Found what? Roots. Dried, twisted strands of strangler fig, wrapped tight enough to leave bruises. And the weirdest part? There isn't a fig tree within 50 yards of that house. Dr. Thorne looked out the window at the bustling street, but all he could feel was the suffocating grip of the unseen. Maybe, the detective muttered, shifting uncomfortably. Nature just decided to take the house back, one way or another.